Hey, hello, I'm Wren Ribeiro, and I want to connect with you about peace and justice. We are interviewing women who labor for peace, as we have forever and always will, until we all feel peace in our homes, our workplaces, our communities, and especially our bodies and minds. This initiative is named Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace. It's a show of intimate conversations with justice workers who are healing their self and communities from the effects of misogyny, capitalism, and climate change. Welcome to the show. My name is Wren Ribeiro, and I wish you complete wellness and lasting peace. Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace is a show of intimate conversations about healing from the effects of misogyny, capitalism, and climate change. In our last episode, we met Allison Luke, and we're back again to have a deeper dive into psychological safety and a lot of tools and nuances of application of how do we create psychological safety when we need it? How do we know we need it? How do we know we have it? So that we're going to talk a little bit about that in this episode. At the moment, our first order of business is to check in with our hearts. Take a deep breath, drop in, and ask ourselves, how is this beating heart right now?
Good.
Yeah? Good. Good's
Grateful.
Good and grateful. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. My heart feels almost like it's at rest. I think that's the word, rest.
Yeah.
Like it's floating. Yeah, that's kind of a fun feeling.
That's a good feeling.
Let's take a deep breath or two of integration and appreciation. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we're back. Allison, do you want to pick up where we left off? I know there were a few things that we wanted to talk about, so let's keep going.
Let's pick up where we left off. Thank you for having me back. And last time I touched on just briefly on the journey that has to happen around getting to psychological safety. So this time I'm going to start to put a few of the tools, the beginning tools, on the table. I just want anyone listening and watching to know this is not a quick journey.
Yeah.
This is not something you can just ingest a few pro tips and suddenly get healed. Like, it's a slow journey. You have to stay in the ring. You have to be intentional.
You have to believe. Yeah. And doesn't it feel like the very core difference between capitalism and cooperative? The cooperative business structures that we're part of that are so values forward, like so intentional, so long-term focused, so holistic. The whole person shows up to work and really like that. As someone who was a general manager and a worker owner of two different renewable energy cooperatives, I've gotten to understand that in a way that if you're not in the cooperative space or the solidarity economy, you might not know. So that it can feel polarized, but there are certainly corporations that are values forward, and there are cooperatives that are falling asleep at the wheel. So I'm wondering, like, with that lens that you're talking about, of application and tools and being in that long game, how do you approach the tool delivery or the framing?
Wow. Everything starts with acceptance, which we touched on briefly in the last one. How acceptance is being willing to face the truth of everything about you and everything about your situation, the painful and the not painful, and anything that's gray and in between, right? Because any good psychologist or therapist will tell you anything that you're not willing to take custody of and anything that you're not willing to accept is everything you can't fix.
Can't fix.
right?
Yeah.
Can't
Can't
fix.
yeah.
Yeah. At that point, your only options are denial, deflection, maladaptive coping mechanisms, essentially. How a big part of how we lack behavioral health is that we're not taught to bond in a healthy way. That starts with our family of origin, and that extends to our community of origin. Common ways that your bonding or ability to bond gets maladapted, broken. Detachment. Detachment is, in a nutshell, is someone being emotionally inaccessible.
Inaccessible.
Right?
Yeah.
It's when I'm telling my mother I was molested by the babysitter's son and I'm crying, and she's telling me, stop crying, and if it happens again, we'll do something about it. Right? Detachment. Abandonment. Someone connecting, then leaving. Right? Somebody who's great with you as long as they don't have to sacrifice. And then you hit some sort of crisis and then they're just gone. Right? Inconsistency. Someone being unstable as a love object. This week they want to love on you and be all up, in your face. Next week, you can't get them to return a phone call or a text. Right? And so forth and so on. Criticism, unloving attacks upon our needy aspects. This one I want to just touch on a little bit longer. We live in a society today where criticism as a behavioral trait, a characterological trait, is more or less ubiquitous. Right?
Say again?
More or less ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous,
right?
Yeah.
Everybody's practicing this, right? And so criticism.
Everybody's practicing criticism.
Everybody's got a critique or a criticism about, and there's a difference between making an observation that's an epiphany for reflection and growth, and making an observation or an attack to
minimize or cut down, right?
Yes, to minimize and cut down. So it's essential when you're making your criticism that you understand the context you're coming from. That you're coming from for yourself. Why am I doing this? And if I'm doing this, do I really want to help this person or the people around at least not go this path? Or is this about me just getting a power urge in the moment?
And you know what would be so powerful in those moments when folks are ready to let that out of their mouths, that criticism, is a breath, right?
Yes.
Breath. A breath is going to help the person understand, ooh, I really got flames in my mouth, or I got some butterflies coming out. Like, I mean, which one is it going to be? And if it's coming from the heart, it's going to be something generative, something joyful, something that, there's tough love, certainly, but tough love doesn't have to be, spat at the other person. It can
exactly.
Really, there's tenderness that you can do tough love with. And so that breath can really give us that moment. And all we need is that one moment to be like, oh, let me just like de-escalate.
Exactly. The criticism is also part of why we don't want to be vulnerable.
Why we don't want to be vulnerable.
It's a big part of why we don't want to be vulnerable, because we also don't want to open ourselves to that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're absolutely,
I get chills so much just talking with you. These subjects really are alive. I'm vibrating with you so much because there's like so much truth here that just those zings of truth just flow right through me. And I hope that you're feeling that too. Because
absolutely. I'm loving this.
Really
loving this. Thank you. And the last one is abuse, which is they define as violations of our soul that destroy our trust. Right?
Violations of our soul
that destroy our trust or destroy our ability to trust and be vulnerable. Yeah. So the main ones are detachment, abandonment, inconsistency, criticism, and abuse. Take a moment and reflect on how have you experienced bonding with your father and mother, right? And then take a moment to reflect on how are you doing this with yourself? How are you doing this with the people around you?
Yeah.
Look at the people that you have good relationships with, decent relationships with, even the bad ones. Because you may find in digging into some of the bad ones that you think are the other person, you may find, oh, I'm actually contributing to the destruction of this relationship here, and I need to
I'm
work on.
perpetuating. I'm a perpetrator. It is so much more painful to be a perpetrator than to be a victim of these things, because the victim first, you shared something very personal, and I had a similar situation. I was stalked, and a knife at 2 o'clock in the morning. And then there was a whole set of abuse from the police, really, really, really bad. And to just kind of like, as the victim, and to be a survivor, and to claim that's a whole big thing. And I like, I believe you, it's not your fault, that whole,
Mhm.
it's important to trust and believe a woman who is surviving this chronic maladaption of society. But from my perspective, it was easier to forgive and be that victim than to be a perpetrator. I've never done anything of the sort, but I
Mhm.
hurt people, and that hurts me more. So that's like, ooh. So if we are looking in the mirror, like you're saying, and we're seeing, oh, I am perpetuating this shit that was modeled for me as a child, it's hard to say, I'm going to change that. How do we change that?
How do
Yeah.
how do we change that? Everything starts with choice, free will,
Mm.
right? Everything starts with choice, right? We all have expectations. Then we have the reality of what we're getting and what we're doing. Primary loss is the feeling and the thought that sits on the top,
Mm.
right? That's not always the secondary loss. So if you're humiliated, your primary loss is anger,
Mm.
right? But the healing comes in identifying what's underneath that.
Mhm.
Underneath that is, when you're humiliated, what you really lose is respect and control, in this example, right?
Mhm.
So when you identify, okay, I need healing from this loss of respect and control in this situation, then you can start that process, right? You've gotta dig deeper. I'm going to quote something by Parker Palmer when he says, wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life. Because criticism is so ubiquitous, and as a result, lack of vulnerability is so ubiquitous. Everybody's going around pretending like brokenness isn't an integral part of life. To be human being is to be broken,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's as you uncover more and more of your brokenness, what am I going to do with this? The
Yes.
beautiful thing
Yes.
about healing is that once you sort of clear the bottleneck, you stop caring so much that you're broken, because you're empowered by the fact that you can navigate the wholeness journey. So it's like,
Exactly.
oh,
Once you name something, you've put it out there, especially if you've named it to somebody else, and they can hold it with you.
mhm,
Especially, ideally that person that you've named it to is safe,
mhm.
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It takes time to learn to identify safe people, especially when you come from a background where all you know is unsafe people. Safe is a foreign concept.
Yeah.
Um, it's building, um, learning to cultivate your ability for yourself and the people around you. The four main needs of the human soul: significance, acceptance, security, and belonging. Right? Significance is essentially the need to be acknowledged, recognized, to have your uniqueness and importance valued.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you don't get that in
Human
your
nature.
origin story, you have to cultivate that in yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Acceptance is embracing every facet of yourself, not just the esteemable parts.
Right. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And how do you start to cultivate acceptance? Right? This is an answer that seems counterintuitive, right?
Because we want that acceptance from others. And if we
Right.
don't accept ourselves first, we don't attract that acceptance, right?
Bingo. Bingo. You build acceptance, that acceptance that you want from others, you build with yourself, you build it through learning to be present. This is tricky, right? Presence, again, we live in a society that defines living through escapism, and being entertained at every moment, whether it's social media, whether it's hanging out with your friends, whether it's doing, right? Presence is, sitting with those negative hurts, thoughts, feelings, attitudes. It's journaling, it's meditation, it's, starting to ask yourself, what's really wrong with the situation? What am I feeling? Becoming aware of your negative thoughts and feelings, and the negative feelings and the thoughts that accompany them, giving attention to the reality of your whole situation. Again, mindfulness, being mindful of your feelings and your surroundings, and then starting to replace those negative thoughts with positive ones, asking yourself what's really wrong with the situation, what I don't like about it, and how can I start to change it? We've already started just by stepping into presence with it, right?
I'd like to ask you, you've got a few more to go through
Go
here?
ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you about self-centering. Like because that ties back to the last episode of narcissism. And when we think about someone who's self-centered, we think, oh yeah, they're all about themselves. They're not about anybody else. They're not able to read the room, understand cues, appreciate and empathize with other people's position or needs in a moment. But doesn't self-centering also mean like being self-aware and being able to advocate for oneself? So like how do we dance with or balance self-centered?
A great question. There's a distinction between being self-centered, self-absorbed, and self-aware, right? And again, empathy is not something you can give to others if you're not practicing with that with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? When you're dealing with someone who's narcissist, whether that's from a behavioral aspect, whether that's on the clinical aspect or behaviorally, because in our very hyper individualistic society, we've all absorbed a trait or two, a behavior here or there, or that's narcissistic. Your job is to identify where that's playing out in your life, right? And how and start the healing process with it. If you cannot give yourself healthy boundaries and self-love and practice significance and acceptance with yourself, there are times when, giving to others, even if it's the right thing to do, you may say, if I do that, I'm on the cusp of being burnt out. And so I have to care for myself and trust that God the Father is going to open a way for this person to get what they need from someone else.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have to control everything.
We don't have to control. One of the things Crispin talks about in her book, Why I'm Not a Feminist, The Feminist Manifesto, one of the latter chapters, it's a fantastic read if you get your hands on it, is how safety has become a euphemism for control. I could not agree more. There's safety does not mean, or unsafeness does not mean everything that I don't like or don't approve. Right. Learn to separate those things. Another thing that we do a lot of in our hyper individualistic society is provisional acceptance, which is acceptance. It's conditional acceptance, right? And also practice that with yourself. Where am I practicing provisional acceptance? Do I love myself when I'm not bloated as a woman, and when I'm bloated, you know what I mean? Where are you practicing provisional acceptance? What I mean?
And celebrate when you catch yourself, right?
And celebrate when you catch yourself. What I mean?
I have a friend who we were talking the other day about how we can be so hard on ourselves. Oh God, it's like programmed in, like women are hard on themselves. Well, maybe it's because we are holding so much that we don't get credit for. People don't see us holding, and it's just like we start to feel like we can't hold anymore. And where do we put it all down, right? So we're talking about that challenge and the littlest things, the littlest moments when we say, oh, I have held enough for today. Celebrate. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to spend money. A celebration could be, I'm going to drink some coconut water, or or something,
Yes, yes.
something that's
Or I'm going to go
special.
for a walk or
Yeah.
take a dance class at the community center that I love, and I haven't done it for a while.
I'm going to dance
You
by
know?
myself.
Right,
Whatever. It's free. It's
or
right
just
here.
put on a song that you love. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Fine. It doesn't. You're absolutely right. We're also taught that, again, when in the way that we subconsciously define in today's society living with entertainment and escapism, a celebration has to be this thing. It doesn't have to be this thing. It can be, a cup of your favorite tea.
Yes. A
I
date with yourself.
a date with yourself, a date with yourself, a date with yourself. Um yeah, it starts there. It starts with learning to be present. When you start to unpack those things in yourself, your own issues with acceptance, provisional acceptance, security, acceptance, significant belonging, you're going to cultivate the tools to start to see that and start to look around at, your children, your partner. You'll start to see where you're doing it, where you're not doing it, where it could be better. Have patience with yourself. We also live in a society where everything's got to happen instantly,
Mm-hmm.
Healing, wholeness is a slow journey. You didn't get broken overnight.
Yes.
You've been broken for most of your life. So when you start this journey, it's not going to get fixed in 2 years. And that's okay. But you will make progress. The goal is the progress. I tell believers all the time, God isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for you to be willing to work with your imperfection.
Yeah.
And if you can work with that, he'll work with that with you.
Right.
All it takes. The people that I have in my inner circle, and this took a long journey to get to a place where I have an inner circle of healthy people, are the people who can own their imperfection and work on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that you are talking about the healthy circle, the people you've chosen to be close to you, and it's not it's not excluding others. I'm assuming, right? Like it's a choice for nourishment and set those boundaries. And when another person who's maybe not in the circle anymore comes and says, I really miss you, and here's some reflection that I've done about ways that I could be a better person with you. You're in the circle again, right?
Yes.
Like it's like you're safe. You're safe now. You're in. I'm with you. I love you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have to allow the grace for people to change. But one thing I've learned the hard way is that you also have to. I've had people come to me in the past and say, like, oh, I was destructive with you in this way, and I let them in. And then only to find out that their reflection didn't have any roots.
Yeah.
So I've learned the hard way that in situations like that, especially when you're dealing with somebody who's done a lot of carnage in your life, psychologically, emotionally, maybe even physically, that reintegration process, you have to sort of yellow light that. Let some time pass. Let a conflict or two appear. Give it some time to see how much work has been done.
Right.
Right. Yeah. The baby steps before you throw open the door. Whereas, and that's with somebody who you've had a relationship with for a long time or a decent amount of time, at least 2-3 years or more. Right. And so, you need, it's different if you're getting to know somebody, you guys have only, been friends or whatever for 6 months, you know what I mean? And they mess up and they come back and they say, hey, I messed up here. That's different. It's fresh. So you can still open that door and let them back in and give them time to, when you've been dealing with abuse.
Static trauma, like it's just over and over and over.
That reintegration process has got to be slow.
Yeah. Exactly. It is so different. Like, I make the distinction between dynamic trauma, which is that comes and goes. It's like, I can deal with it because it is new to you, and I'm going to tell you that hurt, and we'll that's dynamic. That just kind of comes and goes. But static trauma is like all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Great description.
And those traumas are so much harder to heal because they're like in the bones, they're in the behaviors, so that's where the boundaries really need to be stronger.
That's a fantastic description of them, of static versus dynamic trauma. Absolutely. That's absolutely great description. I've never heard that. Thank you for that. It's so true.
Well, let's take a deep breath of just appreciation there. It takes one to know one. Right? That's why we jive, why we're vibrating here. Oh, well, I'm seeing like, I want to give you another couple minutes to just close in on some of the tools that you wanted to share, because we're running out of minutes, sadly.
I'll touch on this some more tools to throw out there. Dysfunctional patterns in relationships, that people do with you and that you also do with other people. Dismissive. When you're dismissive, you doubt the validity of your or another person's emotional needs. Right? And as a result, you or that person will experience self-doubt, while at the same time an intense longing for love and validation. So identify the dismissiveness in your life. Yeah. Right? Controlling.
Just naming it. Ironically, is enough, right? Sometimes all we need to do is name it, so that the other person can
yes, and it's like yes. Controlling, believe it or not, when you're dealing with somebody who is controlling or is controlling to you, controlling is another form of being dismissive. Ironically, and the controlling is dismissiveness through micromanagement. Right? It also doubts or just destroys the validity of the other person's perspective, feelings, minimizing. And unavailable. Where are you being unavailable? Where are the people around you in your inner circle being unavailable? Emotionally unavailable, people who withdraw or withhold love. Where and how are you withdrawing and withholding love with yourself, with other people? Where are people doing this with you? Right? And enmeshment. This is a tricky one because enmeshment, if you're not careful, will mask itself as love. Enmeshment is when the boundary between your identity and another person's becomes fused.
Sounds like codependency, like that.
Yes.
There's so many books on codependency. If it's part of if it's up for you right now in your life, read something about that and bring that story, that perspective to your loved ones, right? To have these
Absolutely. I've seen situations where mothers enmesh their identity into their daughters. So it's like their daughter isn't their own person. She has to think, feel, pursue the same things. You're like a mini me, yeah. And where are you doing this with your life? You could do this with your son. You know what I mean? Like, combative. Combative is somebody who's hypercritical, jealous, competitive with the people in their life. Right? And lastly, unreliable. And that one kind of speaks for itself. Somebody who's unreliable, whether that's emotionally or on a resource perspective, you're always there for them. Again, you hit hardship or crisis, you need them to just back clutch, like they say in baseball, come up and, pinch hit, help with something, they vanish.
And it takes
sometimes
I was just going to say, it takes the smallest little bit of love to call that behavior in, because the person, again, that person who's unreliable is the perpetrator. They're letting everybody down and it hurts them so much. So when we name that and with love and say, I see you, and yeah, I want you to be more reliable. You're not reliable. How can you be more reliable? Because I love you anyway.
That's the right approach. That's the right approach to say, I have somebody in my inner circle who I'm dealing with that now. And, meditating on how to have that conversation with this person to say, hey, I see that. And I'm not judging you for it. I get that this comes from brokenness. So how can I help your journey?
Yes. Wow, Allison. Like maybe someday we'll have a conference that we can co-facilitate. I just put that out there. Had a dream about it. But I thank you so much for joining today. I thank all the listeners and viewers for joining. I'm Wren Ribeiro, and I can't wait till next episode, and to all the breathing, the heart-centered growth and healing in life.
In life. Amen.
Amen.
This initiative is named Mujeres Co-Labor for Peace. It's a show of intimate conversations with justice workers who are healing their self and communities from the effects of misogyny, capitalism, and climate change. This initiative is supported by InnerFortune, the full-life self-coaching journal that is now digital. Join us for peace, and thank you for your heart.